Good morning, everyone. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to Cambridge today. Thank you so much for joining us from across the country and around the world for this special gathering. The Cambridge India Business Dialogue was conceived with a vision to build more than just an event. It aims to foster a legacy of ideas, collaboration, and hopefully long-term relationships grounded in the rich Cambridge ecosystem. Our goal is to bring together thought leaders and change makers who are shaping conversations that will define India's next era of transformation. This year's theme invites us to explore the country's evolving economic and other priorities, how they intersect with opportunity, innovation, and global impact. And so today, please join us in celebrating India, a place of vibrant contradictions, joyful chaos, and relentless ambition. It is where ancient temples stand beside cutting-edge tech parks, where CEOs chant mantras and investors check stock prices during chai breaks. It is a country where we debate philosophy over WhatsApp, launch satellites on a shoestring budget, and still somehow find time to obsess over cricket, amongst many other things. India is the world's largest democracy, a land of jugaad. Happy to explain that and have long conversations over what jugaad really means throughout the day. But really, it's a country that continues to surprise, delight, and defy expectations. We are very proud of what we share with the world. It is a soft power giant, but also a hard-nosed innovator, the only nation to land near the moon's south pole, and one of the youngest, most entrepreneurial populations on Earth. This is the energy we celebrate today, and the future we are here to shape together. As we begin today's dialogue, I invite you to lean into curiosity, question assumptions, and explore new possibilities together. And on that note, I would request everyone in the audience to share as many questions, insights with our speakers throughout the day, engage in conversations. We would encourage the conversations today to be two ways instead of just a one-way conversation. So please, let's all put together a hand in welcoming our Dean Gishan, for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Tanya. Pro-Vice Chancellor, distinguished guests. I have a mic.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
Distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends. It gives me great delight to welcome you all to the Business School, to the Cambridge India Business Dialogue 2025. It's really wonderful to have you all here. Now, I'm here as Dean, but I think I can claim to be here as an honorary Indian as well, with good evidence. The evidence is that we have 6 colleagues from India on the faculty, and at least 4 of them have been mistaken for me or the other way around, right? So when I was a graduate student in the economics faculty at a time when Bhaskar was also there, I had a colleague called Professor Paul Kattuman. He's now Professor Paul Kattuman. And he was in the same year and in the same college. And my tutor's secretary used to say, "Hello, Paul," to him, and "Hello, Paul," to me. Then fast forward, I come to the business school, and our receptionists occasionally used to call me Jaideep. Jaideep here. And then very surprisingly to me, just last week, somebody came up to me and said, "You're Kishore, aren't you?" Now, that I didn't understand. Kishore has a mustache and has hair. I didn't fully understand that. But thus far, nobody has called me Marvin, perhaps for understandable reasons. So seriously, this conference is a celebration of the enduring and long-standing links that Cambridge has had with India. And even though the business school has been set up much more recently in 1990, we have much to celebrate about our links with India. So the first faculty member to be appointed to the business school was Jaideep, who now holds the Nehru chair. The first Indian student came to the business school in 1992. That's just 2 years after the school was created. We have now over 750 alumni from India, and about 70 current students. So the links are very strong, and we would want to strengthen those links going forward. Now, we are gathered here at what I would call a pivotal moment, both for India and the world. The theme of this year's dialogue, Transformation Through Transition, India at the Cusp of a New Era, could not be more timely. India today stands at a remarkable inflection point where tradition meets technology, where demographic dynamism meets digital disruption, and where local innovation meets global innovation. And it is in these moments of transition that leadership, vision, and responsibility become very important. The themes that you will describe and discuss today fit very well with some of the focus areas that we as a business school hope to strengthen. As a business school, we have been looking at our vision and strategy going forward, because I became dean just 6 months ago. And we feel that innovation in all its forms and entrepreneurship has to be one key area given where we are located. And when I say innovation, I include technological innovation, financial innovation, digital innovation, and social innovation as well. I also include the behavioral and organizational responses to those innovations, which includes the future of work and the future of management. But innovation must be anchored in responsibility as well. Responsible business has been part of our DNA as a school. When I joined the business school in 1994, which was 4 years after it was created, this business school had an environmental studies group. It was probably the only business school in the world at the time that had such a group. So much so that about 6 years later, a member of the advisory board who came from industry questioned its existence in a business school. It seemed odd to have such a group in a business school. How things have changed over time. So I think responsible business is something which is part of our DNA, and under that umbrella I would include sustainability, the circular economy, the Women's Leadership Center, and many other activities which take place in the school. We are also living in a time of great uncertainty, where the nature of the uncertainty is quite different to what we as economists or finance people traditionally thought of as uncertainty. Because we now have known unknowns and many unknown unknowns. It's a very different period where planning, whether you are working for a company or a university, is quite challenging because you cannot see that far ahead. So what is the role of a business school in this context? So when I talk to business leaders who work for the leading corporations or even in entrepreneurial businesses, the kinds of decisions that they are engaging with now are quite different to some of the decisions they had to make 20 years ago. Many of them went to business school 20 to 30 years ago, and they were fed the standard business diet of accounting, finance, marketing, strategy, economics. Those subjects continue to be relevant and valuable. But the decisions they have to make now involve geopolitics, disruptions to supply chains, cybersecurity. They were not necessarily trained to make those kinds of decisions. So my colleagues and I believe that the business school student of tomorrow needs to be presented with frameworks which go beyond business. And here we could have a great opportunity because we are located in a university that has great strength in the sciences and the social sciences. So we will continue to be a business school, but hopefully offer an education which is business plus, where we bring in people from international relations, from history, from political science, as well as technology and engineering, where we've always enjoyed strong links. So while the risks are enormous, I also think the opportunities are great. If you look at the history of humankind, through great adversity have come some of the best ideas and innovations. And I'd like to leave you with the words of that Indian poet and philosopher, Sri Aurobindo, who was a graduate of King's College. The future is not fixed. It is a field of possibilities. But before I end, I want to also thank our brilliant student team. Could the organizers please stand? We already have some here. All the others, please stand. They have done a marvelous job. And with people like them, the future is secure and safe. Thank you so much.
So anytime I hear Professor Gishan, it's always like a learning experience because with his humor and quotes, he always keeps us all entertained. So thank you, Professor, for your kind words. Now I would like to introduce Professor Bhaskar Vira, the Pro Vice Chancellor for Education at the University of Cambridge. Professor Vira is a distinguished scholar in political economy and environmental governance with a focus on social, economic, and environmental institutional dimensions of natural resource use and sustainability. He is the former head, he was a former head of the Department of Geography and is the founding director of the University of Cambridge Conservation Research Institute. His long-standing academic and personal connections with India, Professor Vira brings in a deeply informed and globally attuned perspective for challenges and opportunities facing in emerging economies. So we would like to call you Professor and give us your insights. Thank you.
I think I've got a mic that's working. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. And Gishan, thank you for this warm welcome to the business school. As I've been introduced, I'm not a member of the faculty in the business school, but like you, Gishan, I'm frequently mistaken for the other Pro Vice Chancellor who looks a little bit like me. So people say, hi, Kamal. So I think I can pretend to be a professor at the business school as my alter ego. So I think this is I think the university is getting used to having a few of us around in leadership positions. It's lovely to be here. This is, I believe, the third edition of this wonderful gathering. Is it a coincidence? It's my third year as Pro Vice Chancellor. So maybe there's a sort of happy meeting of minds in terms of the importance that you assign to the work that's going on in this space at the business school, and the way in which we as a university are thinking about our relationship with India, which goes back a very long time, but there is a particular moment in which we're trying to think about our strategy, our engagement across a whole range of areas. The business school is very much an adda. This is where it happens. There's 70 students this year. I think you're probably the largest concentration of Indian students in any one department in Cambridge. Approaching 1,000 alumni, this is going to be a sort of landmark moment, and we must remember to celebrate that when it happens. It really does signal the extent to which the work that you're doing here, and it really does now begin to cut across the whole spectrum of areas that are represented in a university. And Gishan, I completely agree with what you're saying. Having a business school which is embedded within a university enables us to have those cross-disciplinary conversations that equip us to think about this uncertain future in very different ways. What we try and do is to train the mind rather than to teach techniques. And we train the mind to be critical, to be reflexive, to be adaptive. And that's really what the role of a university is. The content that you learn at university will keep changing. The content that we learned as graduate students in economics 30 years ago is very different to what contemporary graduate students might be learning. And if you think about the role of education as filling empty vessels with knowledge, we're not really here to do that. What we're here to do is to enable you to have the critical faculty, the way to think about issues, so that when new problems present themselves, you can adapt to those new problems. And the world will keep changing and will keep throwing new problems at you. So I think this is where the value of having this close embeddedness in the Cambridge context, the fact that we have the oldest approach to interdisciplinarity anywhere in the world through our collegiate system, enables people to have conversations from across different perspectives and to enable us to challenge each other from different starting points. And that's where true learning really happens. And I think the business school exemplifies that with the openness with which you embrace the entire university. So I welcome that, and I welcome particularly the themes that you've chosen to focus on for this event today, which are very close to my own heart, of course. You're going to be talking about the next generation, and nothing could be more important. People talk frequently about the concept of a demographic dividend. Young people are going to be the force for change, but we need to find ways to gainfully engage that energy and enthusiasm. We need to find ways to harness that. It's not just about job creation. It's about giving them the opportunities to think, to innovate, to create. And that concept of the next generation and how we actually empower them to take control and fix the problems that our generation is leaving behind is a really important part. And I'm really glad that you're focusing on that. I was delighted to see greening growth in your themes. And as Gishan said, in fact, people in the Judge were talking about this in the 1990s. I decided to work on environmental economics in the 1990s. It wasn't very fashionable at the time. It's slowly becoming a little bit more mainstream, but it's fantastic that you've got a set of conversations around that. And then, of course, technology, and particularly the role of AI, which is providing us with all sorts of really interesting challenges as well as opportunities. The initial response from a lot of my academic colleagues was on the challenges. How do we know that the students are writing their own essays? Well, that's actually a sort of small problem in the larger scheme of things. I think the opportunities themselves are much more exciting for us to think about. And the collaborations that we can forge, we have a university-wide initiative called AI at CAM, which is trying to develop a cross-disciplinary approach to this, both in terms of deep technology and the development of AI, as well as the philosophers talking about the ethics of AI. And bringing all of that together is really interesting as well. And again, that's something which a university like this is able to do. But the opportunities that present themselves, particularly with the technological capabilities in India, as well as the kind of relationships that we have, are really very exciting. So I'm delighted with what you've chosen as a focus for this, this event. Again, I want to thank the organizers. It seems that every year the event gets better, but that's no disrespect to those who organized the previous two events. It's just that you keep building on your success. And it's fantastic to see the energy in the room. I enjoyed being with some of you at dinner last night. It's really exciting to see you all coming together. I know I now stand between you and the rest of the program, and you're here for that, not for me. So I think I'm going to hand over to James next, and then we'll open up for the plenary. So thank you all. It's wonderful to be here, and welcome to Cambridge.
Thank you so much, Professor. This has been an accumulation of all the last year's support and the event. Now introducing our corporate social responsibility partner, FUEL, Friends Union for Energizing Lives. FUEL is a social enterprise focused on empowering Indian youth with career guidance, skills training, and essential resources. FUEL aims to bridge the gap between education and employment, particularly for the underserved communities, helping young people make informed career decisions and build successful futures. We'll be showing a short video for the same.
The youth holds immense potential. Yet, after class 12, many face uncertainty, often missing deadlines and missing opportunities due to lack of guidance. FUEL, Friends Union for Energizing Lives, bridges this gap. Through its business school, it provides mentorship, career guidance, and the right resources, ensuring students transition successfully from classrooms to careers. Founder Mr. Ketan Deshpande, along with his chief mentor, Mr. Santosh Khuralkopi, initially began conducting sessions for class 12 students, wherein they provided them thorough assistance on all educational aspects. But over the last 19 years, FUEL has scaled up.
FUEL stands for Friends Union for Energizing Lives, and a group of friends came together to solve the challenges which they faced because of lack of awareness, lack of information about careers and scholarships. That was the trigger point, as a result of which Fuel was started. We prepared students to create information about different opportunities and make them aware about it. Provide them career guidance, provide them scholarship information, provide them skill development, and finally the degrees in their education.
Fuel is spreading its wings of change by empowering girls through education and offering skill development programs for youth, also providing scholarships for both undergraduate and postgraduate students.
मैं ऐसे बैकग्राउंड से आता हूँ जहाँ पे लोग सपने देखते हैं कि हम एक कॉर्पोरेट वर्ल्ड को देखें, एक हमारा भी बोर्ड रूम हो जिसमें सीईओ के साथ हम बात करें, तो वैसा मेरे को वैसा एक्सपोजर भी नहीं मिला। मैंने यहाँ पे एडमिशन लिया है स्कॉलरशिप के थ्रू, और अभी मैं उन स्किल्स को सीख रहा हूँ जो एक कॉर्पोरेट लाइफ में, एक कॉर्पोरेट वर्ल्ड में चाहिए।
Business School has played a crucial role in shaping my career. Today, I'm proud to share that I have been selected as a HR professional at Kalpa Power Private Limited. These achievements would not have been possible without the guidance, support, and opportunity provided by Fuel. I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to Fuel for believing in me and giving me this golden opportunity to grow.
Fuel has been appreciated by the Honorable Prime Minister of India, Shri Narendra Modi, and Honorable former President of India, Shri Ramnath Kovind ji. And Fuel's founder, Mr. Ketan Deshpande, has also been awarded the Mahatma Award. Fuel is proud to partner with the prestigious Cambridge India Conference and Judd Business School, University of Cambridge. Fuel also contributes to societal welfare by granting scholarships to the girl children of Army Jawans, martyrs, and families of Army personnel under Aspirational District Program by Niti Aayog. What started as an institution is now rapidly growing into a Fuel Skill Tech University. Fuel team received heartfelt messages from leaders and donors on this special occasion.
I congratulate the entire Fuel team for the remarkable work done by them over the years.
You are well on your way to reaching 10 million, as well as further setting up the Fuel Skill Tech and Entrepreneurship University by 2025. My warmest congratulations on that.
Fuel has a vision to set up Future Skills University to bridge the skilling gap between industry and academia, which is commendable and important for nation, and we wish all the best.
I would like to congratulate the Fuel team for taking up this important endeavor of launching the Fuel Future Skills Institute. I hope that through this endeavor, you will be able to achieve the impact and the momentum that you envision.
श्री केतन देशपांडे एवं उनकी टीम के द्वारा जो उपक्रम शुरू किया गया फेल के रूप में, इसने पिछले कुछ वर्षों में करियर गाइडेंस और काउंसलिंग में महाराष्ट्र में बहुत ही अच्छा कार्य किया।
Fuel empowers minds and transforms lives. It aims to equip youth with skills for limitless potential.
We have hired around 10 students from Fuel at Syngenta. They are doing absolutely fabulous work. Very skilled, very hardworking, very committed, and we would want to take this association further.
Thank you so much, Fuel, for all the support. It's great to have you on board with us. And finally, it is an honor to introduce James Crabtree, Executive Director of the Asia Office at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, IISS. James is a leading voice on geopolitics, strategy, and international affairs across Asia. In his role at IISS, he helps shape global conversations on the region's evolving power dynamics, with a particular focus on the Indo-Pacific. Previously, James worked as the Senior Policy Advisor in the UK government and spent years as a journalist, including as the Financial Times Bureau Chief in Mumbai. With his rare blend of policy experience, journalistic depth, and strategic foresight, James is ideally positioned to help us understand India's emerging role on the global stage. Please welcome James.
Can you hear me okay? Excellent. Thank you so much for having me this morning. So yes, as the introduction suggested, I have a slightly strange peripatetic career path. I spent 5 years living in India as the Mumbai bureau chief for the Financial Times, and so had an excellent time with Mr. Jain and others last night catching up on the latest trajectory of various of my old friends, the Indian tycoon class, and what they'd been doing since I left. I then moved to Singapore and spent 8 years there, the first 5 of which I pretended to be an academic at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, still looking at issues of finance and globalization, and then took a pivot to hard security and ran for 3 years the office of the IISS, which runs the Shangri-La Dialogue Security Conference, which is actually happening at this very moment in Singapore. So it happens this weekend. And so last night in Singapore, President Macron of France gave the keynote address, and Defense Secretary Hegseth of the United States spoke earlier this morning when we were all still asleep. So I suppose I think I'm very grateful both to all of the various student co-chairs who've put together this event, and the dean, and those who invited me. I mean, in a sense, I think what the organizers wanted me to do is, before you get into the serious business of talking about Indian business and the business opportunity, is to sort of give a little bit of geopolitical scene setting, the context in which India finds itself. And I suppose the reason why I think that's sensible is that when I arrived in Mumbai in 2011, it was still an era in which the book that I went on to write, The Billionaire Raj, was ostensibly a colorful story about the misbehavior of a certain class of Indian tycoons, but underlying that was a story about India's engagement with globalization. And really the reason for the story that I told in The Billionaire Raj, the rise of India's tycoon class and the problems of inequality and crony capitalism that went with it, was about the moment beginning in the early 90s, but accelerating during the 2000s and the 2010s, when India was plugged into the old world of globalization, and you had an onrush of capital, international integration that in some ways sort of fried the circuit boards of the Indian system, and you know, we know the consequences of that and the rebuilding that has gone on since. That world is now, in a sense, receding into history. And in its place, you have a world which, instead of clever people in places like the Cambridge Judge School working out how to remove international barriers to commerce and cooperation, you have a new world in which clever people in different parts of the world are working out how to put barriers up again. And therefore, India, as the last major global power to rise, and the one that is at the earliest stage in the development of its rise, is going to have to rise in a totally different context to the one that China, for instance, undertook as it began to rise in the era of what Arvind Subramanian would call hyper-globalization. And therefore, understanding this geopolitical context is critical. I was last in Delhi 6 weeks ago, and to kind of bring this right up to date, as I moved back to Europe last autumn, and therefore have been watching firsthand the trauma that has been going on in Europe as we have contemplated the return of Mr. Trump and what that means for Europe's security in the aftermath of Ukraine, and given the sort of the family breakup between Europe and the United States. Nonetheless, arriving in Delhi was a bit of a shock, given how calm everybody seemed about the geopolitical currents emanating around the world. It reminded me a little bit of a story that I used to tell when I launched The Billionaire Raj. I was always very happy when I got to do book events, because writing a book, I used to describe, Jaideep will know this as a multiply published author, the process of launching a book I used to describe as the quiet before the quiet. As in, you put your heart and soul into this, and you have your book, and then nothing very much happens for quite a long time. And it felt a little bit like that being in Delhi, that you looked at from Europe, everybody was looking at Washington, and, you know, sort of various buildings were burning, and, you know, things are getting slightly out of control. And yet I arrived in India, and everybody seemed very calm about what was going on, as if sort of, you know, India's progression in the world, India was well placed, in a sense. And I suppose the argument I suppose I want to make today is that India is well placed for this new era of geopolitical competition, but that it has to be more, particularly those in the business community, have to be more mindful of these most important changing relationships. And I suppose in the short time I have, I want to talk about three: the India-China relationship, the India-US relationship, and because we are here in Europe, and I now partly earn my crust working for the European Council on Foreign Relations, and spending a lot of time trying to think about how we can supercharge the India-Europe relationship in the same way that has happened between India and the US. So I'll say a little bit about that. So let's start with China. This is the biggest change that has happened in India's international outlook since, I mean, the moment that I arrived in the early 2010s, I think if you were a betting person, you would have said that India and China were destined to be pretty friendly with one another, particularly when Narendra Modi arrived. It was clear that India sought a kind of a favorable set of relationships with China, and that there were good reasons for that. India needed infrastructural development and capital. China could provide this in spades. And that wasn't what happened, as you're all aware. And so it was very striking, again, being in Delhi 6 weeks ago, that I was in town for the best part of a week. Nobody mentioned Pakistan once. And that would have changed if you were going today. But it was all the United States and China. And in a sense, the trajectory that India has been on, beginning in the middle of the 2010s, but accelerating particularly through the Galwan crisis, is to try and move beyond its position in South Asia and view itself as engaged in a sort of geopolitical dynamic that is fundamentally linked to the China on the one hand and the United States on the other. That isn't to say that India's foreign policy objectives have changed dramatically. It, still views foreign policy through the lens of economic development, territorial integrity, its role in South Asia. But what I noticed living in Singapore was that India now has a much broader conception of its role as an Indo-Pacific power, and that's fundamentally because of the challenge presented by China, not just on the northern border, but in South Asia, in Sri Lanka, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh. And the threat that China poses and the way that China has behaved has, in a sense, forced India to adopt a series of international behaviors over the last 20 years, but particularly over the last 10 and the last 5, which is partly about a strategy of what is called multi-alignment, but which really has involved an attempt to align more closely with the United States, with the Quad countries, the sort of advanced industrial democracies of Asia, to some extent the Europeans, and then a sort of selection of high-capacity emerging and middle powers, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf, Israel, for instance. I mean, you can come up with your own list. And that's fundamentally because of China. And I suppose that relationship I view as a sort of most likely to be an enduringly competitive relationship. It's quite hard to go to. You do hear people talk about the potential for a rapprochement, but in the absence of a very significant change of Chinese strategy in the way that China behaves towards India, it's quite hard to see that changing. So that's sort of relationship one with China. Relationship two with the United States. Ashley Tellis, who some of you will be aware of his work at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, used to talk about the fact that the US attitude to India was one of strategic altruism. Anything that was good for India was basically good for us. And that goes back more than 2 decades now. That in a sense, India's rise provided balance to the Indo-Pacific. It helped the US deal with China. It came with all sorts of other ancillary benefits. So you had a kind of a benign attitude towards India from the US, which increasingly was mirrored from Delhi, especially when Mr. Modi and ultimately Mr. Jaishankar, the foreign minister, came to power. There were lots of things that the US wanted out of India. There were also things that India wanted out of the US: defense cooperation, technological innovation, particularly the ISET program, which has now been renamed, I think, as TRUST. But in a sense, the reimagining of the US-India bilateral relationship, not as this kind of difficult, problematic, prickly, sort of viewed through the lens of the war on terror and relations with Pakistan, but about economic opportunity and particularly about technological partnership. I mean, this was a very conscious decision on both sides to try and recreate this relationship in a way that was much more positive and based around innovation and private sector innovation, not just sort of government to government innovation. And I suppose the question that I now sit with is, well, what does Trump mean for all of this? As in, were the people that I was talking to 6 weeks ago in Delhi right to think that basically everything goes on as before? Or does Trump represent a sort of mini version of the kind of rupture for the India-US relationship that it certainly has been for Europeans? And I think you can make the argument on both sides. We had dinner with the External Affairs Minister, and he, not quite in so many words, but basically said for the last 20 years, India's strategy in the world has been to put a few more chips in the American account every year. And every year this has worked out pretty well for India. And therefore that's what they'll continue to do. Continue to try and develop this relationship in defense, in technology and innovation, in terms of FDI in areas like semiconductors. You know, so I think you have leading India at the moment an administration that still remains pretty pro-American. You still have the common Chinese challenge. You also have an advantage that India has. I mean, somebody put it to me like this, that this is a good moment. It's not a very good moment to be a US ally, but it's not a bad moment to be a US partner. As in, Trump views allies as, you know, fundamentally kind of negligent scroungers. But he's perfectly happy with partners. And in a sense, unlike the Europeans, you know, India doesn't really rely on the US to provide its security. It's a useful, mutually beneficial relationship. But Trump doesn't view India with the same sort of raw deal mentality. On the other hand, you have begun to see some tensions in the US-India bilateral. I mean, you sort of saw this initially, I think, when Modi went to visit Trump right in the early days of the administration, and you had this sort of slightly absurd situation in which you had Modi and Jaishankar and the Commerce Minister all meeting Elon Musk and his children, which was something that I think, you know, diplomatically was didn't go down terribly well. But most specifically in the recent India-Pakistan confrontation, then the role that the US played is one that has annoyed a lot of people in Delhi for claiming to have brokered this ceasefire, which they didn't really broker. You have, for instance, Apple and the way that Trump is treating Apple over its attempts to move production from China to India, and in a sense hitting Apple over the head and say, actually, we don't want production in India, we want it back at home, and, you know, $3,000-4,000 iPhones, please. And so I think a combination of these geopolitical and economic currents are at least asking some questions about the extent to which this administration is going to be as favorable towards India as earlier ones, and also about how this relationship is going to work. The relationship between India and the US has been driven by the respective national security councils. That's difficult in the US now because the US, Trump has just entirely destroyed most of his own national security council. He's fired most of the people who you would have been dealing with, and therefore whether you're going to have at a sort of mechanical level the same connective tissue between the US and the Indian side, I don't know. I mean, I think it's at least a question worth asking. That relationship, it seems to me, is likely to be rockier than it has been over the last 5 years. So what does that mean for Europe, for those of us in the United Kingdom and the rest of Europe who are trying to see, well, how can we build better relationships with India, both at the geopolitical level, but also at the sort of business and technology level? And here I think there's a kind of golden moment of opportunity where you have a whole range of factors that are coming together. It wouldn't be unfair to say that traditionally this relationship has been at best underdeveloped. I mean, for all of the time that I lived in India, it wasn't a great secret that India didn't really take Europe very seriously. They, in a sense, as a trading partner, but India, doing trade deals with India is tricky. And therefore, one of the main tools in the European toolkit was one that was always quite problematic. But geopolitically, Europe, if you divide the world between carnivores and herbivores, Europe was a sort of herbivorous power. It wasn't really to be taken seriously as a geopolitical actor. Europe, on the other hand, was in a space in which it, as a German friend of mine said, tended to be strategically obnoxious, as in it would turn up and talk about human rights and Kashmir and caste and all sorts of things that were not particularly helpful when you're trying to do business deals. A lot of that has now fallen away. You know, because of the Ukraine war, Europe is becoming more strategically carnivorous and less obnoxious. It doesn't turn up and provide lectures about human rights anymore. It's also becoming more interesting for India. I mean, in a funny way, Ukraine is often seen as a problem because Europe was hoping that India would support Ukraine, and India has its own equities in the relationship with Russia. But because Europe is now rearming and becoming much more serious about its own security, I think, and I got this impression in Delhi, India is taking it much more seriously. It sort of looks at the European Union and the major European powers, not just the traditional big three of the United Kingdom, France and Germany, but also the Eastern European powers, Poland, the Baltic states, as serious geopolitical actors, not major powers, but middle powers, worth getting to know, and also those that have useful attributes that India will find useful, technological innovation, common challenges over the climate transition, particularly with respect to over-reliance on Chinese climate-related technologies, batteries and electronic vehicles, defense, a whole range of different areas, and trade and technology. I mean, we may see by the end of this year a Europe-India trade deal, which would be remarkable, even if it's only a kind of, lightweight early harvest sort of trade deal that you can knock together in 6 months. But even so, the fact that something like that would normally have taken 2 decades to complete might be partially completed within 6 to 9 months gives you a sense, I think, of the new seriousness on both sides. So as you have this conversation today, and we kind of move forward to delve into the more of the granular details of the business conversation, I suppose what I would say is that the world that these business links are being created is very different from the one that I started to write about a decade and a half ago. And it's one in which business decision makers and those studying them at institutions like Judge simply have to be more aware of these geopolitical dynamics. In a sense, geopolitics is going to drive business strategy in a way that it didn't before. The whole idea of the rules-based international order was that you took commerce and trade and you put it off in a separate world of its own where it wasn't to be disturbed by the kind of red in tooth and claw world of geopolitics. You kind of protected it and said, you can plan with certainty for your business and investments, knowing that these rules will protect you, and you're not. And that world is gone. It is very clearly gone. And therefore, as you begin to think about the way in which you're going to manage investment and technological partnership and innovation, then you need to think more about these kind of geopolitical dynamics and how they might shape and affect the world that we're moving into. With that, thank you very much for having me, and I hope you have a great day.